Hi to all my subscribers. I'm doing a slightly different format. This is an audio, no pictures, and I plan to do a few more of these, partially because of the load of work at the moment. It's rather difficult to always get time to set the camera up and do a live. Just a message that I am going to be doing a broadcast for the UK election and a couple more updates for Spain, Italy, Canada, and also for the impeachment of Donald Trump. So I just wanted to give my thoughts on last night's what's being termed as a car crash interview with Prince Andrew, but I want to cover a few details that I don't think have been covered elsewhere. As you know, I did a blog before on Jeffrey Epstein, and I feel that it's possibly coincidental that on the 30th of October, Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned pathologist who was conducting the second autopsy on Jeffrey Epstein on behalf of his family, concluded that he thought it was murder because of the numerous broken bones in the neck, which I discussed in detail on my previous vlog on Jeffrey Epstein. And 2 weeks after that, Andrew's doing this interview. So I wonder that because this now potentially could become a murder inquiry with more investigations, more is going to come out, therefore there's pressure on Prince Andrew to have done this interview. These are a couple of key points. At one stage, towards the end of the interview, and it is in the transcript that can be found on the BBC, which I might link to, Emily Maitler said, "Would you make a statement under oath if you were required to?" At which point he pauses and says that, oh, well, like any person, I'd have to get legal advice, I'd have to speak to my lawyers. Then he mentions the words, "If push came to shove and I really had to, I would." I thought that was a strange response, because if I was telling the truth and I was asked if I said something under oath, my initial reaction would have been, yes, of course. So I think this is the problem when someone's not used to doing interviews, not schooled in them. They think too much and perhaps give an answer which could give the perception of being evasive. Now, I absolutely don't know what happened. Innocent until proven guilty. We can only comment on what is said. What else I found odd was, do you need to go and visit a friend for 4 days in order to tell them you can't see them anymore? Especially as he already hadn't been seeing Jeffrey Epstein for 4 years, since he came under suspicion in 2005. So surely he could have just continued not to see him, since he hadn't really seen him for many years. I think for 5 years he hadn't seen him anyway, so why make this special trip? He claims that he stayed with Jeffrey Epstein because it was convenient. I would have asked the question, convenient exactly how? Why was it convenient? I'd like to know, because a man of his means can stay virtually anywhere. Then he said it was better for him to stay with Jeffrey Epstein for 4 days, because Jeffrey was literally so busy, and he was in and out, and the best way to find him is to be staying with him. However, Emily Maitler said that during that time, Jeffrey actually had a party in Andrew's honor. So therefore, wouldn't the party have been the perfect place to say, well, excuse me, I can't really be seen to be seeing you anymore? Why did he have to be there 4 days? Next question. He makes out on one hand that he doesn't regret the association with Jeffrey Epstein because it was so incredibly helpful, and he does admit that he was on his plane several times, he was at his New York residence, he was at his Florida residence, and yet at another stage he said at the times when Jeffrey Epstein was invited to royal events and to Sandringham and to other royal palaces, he was only there as a plus one. He maintains that it was actually Ghislaine Maxwell that was invited, and she brought Jeffrey along. So on one hand, he's saying that Jeffrey's such a great friend that he felt it was the honourable thing to do to go over there and tell him to his face that he couldn't see him anymore, and he'd stayed with him for 4 days, and he regularly stayed at his residence. But then he also wants you to believe that Jeffrey wasn't such a great friend. He was a friend of a friend, and it was Ghislaine Maxwell that was actually his friend. So I think there's a bit of a disconnect there. Secondly, where is Ghislaine Maxwell? She's a key witness and also a co-accused in these matters, and it doesn't seem that anyone's seen her for quite a while. So where is she? He did see her back in April, he suggests, that sort of time, early spring he calls it. And what were they talking about? And why did they still have such a close relationship? In an interview with George Galloway, he mentions that after the death of her father, Ghislaine was emotionally and financially bereft. She was, of course, Robert Maxwell's favourite daughter. He was in disgrace. He defrauded the pension fund of his Mirror Group. She went looking to Epstein as a sugar daddy. So therefore, what was the relevance of her to Prince Andrew? Why did he need to see her that often? Wasn't it a bit odd, bearing in mind the disgrace her father had brought on the family, that he was so closely connected? Also raised questions for me. Then again, we hear that he was transitioning out of the Navy and he needed Jeffrey Epstein's help to teach him. Jeffrey Epstein was like a teacher, he wants us to believe, who was going to help him kind of get into his role as a trade envoy. Well, I thought we were in the EU and they deal with all our trade for us. I'm not quite sure. But I'm also curious that out of the whole British establishment, out of the whole, we have a whole country, was there no one other than Jeffrey Epstein who the state could have appointed to help Prince Andrew to kind of grow into that role? So it seems to me odd that he had absolutely no idea how to branch into this new role, whatever it really was, and he needed the help of that kind of person. I'm also very curious because Jeffrey Epstein's activities, very much like Jimmy Savile, have been talked about for decades, right? It wasn't a surprise to most people when he was finally arrested in 2005. Like I say, very much like Savile, people knew. So you would expect people in MI5 and the CIA would have known that there was something rather iffy about him. And bearing in mind, Andrew's not just your regular guy who maybe has a few dodgy friends. Everywhere he goes with security, with a minder. He gets constant advice from the Secret Service. He's certainly in the know, and being in the royal family is very protected. So how come he wasn't informed at any stage that this was a dodgy character? Because I'm pretty sure that MI5 must have known. And certainly, didn't he get better advice about the trip he made in 2010? He says some people advised him to get in contact, and some people advised him not to. Well, who were the people who were advising him to get into contact? Because it seems that their role should be called into question. So, and as for his role in WikiLeaks, wasn't part of the WikiLeaks. His role as a trade envoy wasn't part of the reason that he got kind of jettisoned from that position because of his association with Epstein. So on one hand, he's saying the association was helpful to his work, but it was the ultimate reason why he got kind of deselected from that role, along with the WikiLeaks revelations, which kind of portrayed him as a person who was widely regarded as a buffoon, as a loudmouth, as someone incredibly arrogant and full of hubris. So they went on a lot about the pizza thing and the sweating thing. What I find is interesting is one of the accusations from Virginia is that one of the places where she apparently had this sexual liaison with him was in New York. So he was questioned about it, and I was expecting him to say that at that particular date he wasn't even in New York, he was in the UK or he was wherever else. But he admits that at that particular occasion he was in fact in New York, and he was staying at one of the UK's consular facilities, which was very close to where Jeffrey Epstein lived. So it seems that Virginia has pinpointed a date on which he very well could have been at Jeffrey Epstein's house, which seems to indicate that she does have a certain amount of knowledge. Now, that certainly doesn't indicate that he did anything wrong, and there's no evidence to indicate that he did anything wrong. But I certainly think that does show that Virginia Roberts has been able to identify a date in which he was in close proximity of that residence, therefore lends some credence to some of the things she is saying. So, let's see. Yeah, so as I say, I do find this whole thing bizarre. Whether Andrew has done anything or not, the fact that he continued to have this relationship and no one thought it was ill-advised, it's very strange.